All right, everybody. It's a couple minutes past noon, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome to those on the call. Appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to attend the second part of our spring webinar series. This one we're actually just calling Financial Planning 101. So this is kind of just a basic intro to financial planning. Try to answer anybody's questions for folks that are just trying to get started on this and might not sure where to begin or what all goes into it. So again, we're joined again by Eric Crispin, our managing partner. So really, we'll just take questions again from the audience as we usually have. Thank you to those who have submitted some questions beforehand. We'll kind of actually follow this along what we call our financial well check. So it's a document that we do here internally at Oxford. It's it's how we deliver that first C that we promised, that clarity of a written financial plan. But it goes through 5 main areas of planning, and we'll talk about that a little bit today and what goes into that and some questions that folks have submitted along those lines. So with that, again, just a couple housekeeping items like we usually do. Again, this whole session is being recorded. For those of you in attendance today, we will send an email out next week with the recording posted to our website, and also some informational white papers and things like we've done in the past. If you have any questions or want to submit something to myself and Eric, use that chat box on the right side of the screen, and I'll continue to moderate as I usually do, and Eric and I will just go back and forth and answer these questions for you. So with that, off we go. So Eric, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. Really, getting into that first part of that, financial plan, kind of that good solid base. It's not a very fun topic to talk about, but something that's very important. You might talk a little bit about estate planning, and the question is, when should you really be thinking about estate planning? When do I need to get a will? What goes into that? Do I need a trust? You see these words out there, but I think not a lot of folks know what they mean, and they think it sounds like fancy legalese stuff. So, when's an appropriate time to start thinking about building that estate planning base?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I imagine for most folks, the idea of sitting down with an attorney and going through and making plans for death is probably right up there with a root canal in terms of excitement and priority for everybody. And, obviously, it's not everyone's most enjoyable experience, but it is incredibly important. And so Pat made mention of this document we have called the Financial Well Check, which is really our checklist for making sure the 5 major areas of everyone's planning is done. And I think when people sit down with us, they normally assume we want to talk about investments and building portfolios, and that's important stuff. But we have to have some of the fundamentals in place first. And believe it or not, the very first area of the 5 that we start with is actually estate planning. And so when folks come in and meet with us, we'll ask questions about, have they done any documents such as wills, living wills, powers of attorney, trusts, if that's applicable. And, most often folks probably haven't done that anytime recently. It's not something that has to be updated all the time, but it is really important to get those things, put in place. And there can be changes in people's lives, whether that be, adding kids to the mix, changes in marital status, moving to a new state. And even those of us who work in this stuff all the time sometimes slip up a little bit, and you kind of forget, if you move to a new state, you probably need to have your stuff looked at just to make sure that documents that were drafted in one state are still applicable in the place you live now. I just recently moved to the state of Kentucky, and I'll just go ahead and confess I haven't quite updated things, but I've been a little busy with unpacking boxes and dealing with a global pandemic. So other than that, I'm going to get right to it. But that's the type of thing that happens. Life gets in the way of doing these things. And so we just encourage clients to really stay on top of that. We will serve as a catalyst for folks to help them get those things done, whether that means connecting them with, if it's a local attorney that's needed, whether that is connecting them with some just online services that allow somebody to get some things taken care of. We just know how vitally important these things are. Most of the time, there's nothing urgent about it until that one time when suddenly there's something very urgent about it. And, in doing what we do, we've unfortunately worked in a lot of client situations where, things got put off and those documents were needed, and it's emergency situations. And so we just really like to stress how important that is. And we feel it's a great foundation to the beginning of a financial plan.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Next question we have actually kind of gets into that next section of the well check that we do, which is just overall risk management. So we get into various types of insurances, emergency funds, things like that. So I'll actually take this question. Someone asked, how much should I have in an emergency fund, or what's an appropriate amount to keep outside of the market, and certainly even just in the bank for kind of a rainy day fund. So I'll break that down to actually 2 parts. One is sort of the base emergency fund. So this is related to your bills and expenses. We typically recommend about 3 to 6 months in liquid cash in a bank account. You can either have that. We've seen people do that several different ways. One is they actually have a larger checking account or savings account that just part of that covers 3 to 6 months of expenses, or they actually make a separate account and earmark it. We've seen that work for some folks who just say, what, I don't ever want to get tempted to touch this or spend it or invest it or whatever they might do. So they actually make a separate account at the bank called rainy day fund. So again, 3 to 6 months is what we've seen work for most folks. I have seen some things written lately that obviously in the light of the global pandemic and people, employment and things are a little bit shaky, a little bit different than they've been in the past, that maybe even going up a little longer than 6 months might be prudent. And that's really a personal choice. But we always really want to see 3 to 6 as that base. And then certainly we've talked about in prior webinars before about our Power of 5 investing philosophy, over and above what you need for your basic expenses to cover emergency fund. Certainly the next 5 years worth of your upcoming withdrawals, if you're taking money out of a retirement plan, you want to see that set aside in that stability bucket over and above the emergency fund, just to make sure you have that war chest built up and those dollars aren't at risk. So thank you for the question on the emergency fund, and 3 to 6 months is what we recommend there.
And as Pat said, I think this is advice that has been, I think really important advice to follow it during any economic time. But in particular here in the last couple of months, I think we've really seen just how incredibly tenuous many Americans' financial security is. And, people are working 2 jobs and things are tough. And truly it's a paycheck to paycheck thing for many, many millions of people. And then to have something like this come up while, no one could have foreseen a global pandemic happening. There are things that will come up and could be just simple loss of employment and a bad economy, where this 3 to 6 month thing, even that sometimes isn't quite enough. And, unfortunately, a lot of folks are going through some pain right now where they probably didn't have much of a war chest set aside at all, let alone 6 months worth. So just want to really reiterate how incredibly important those things are. And, don't try to be cute with it either and say, well, if I'm going to have 6 months of money tied up in the bank, the banks aren't paying anything right now. I mean, hate to not be making some money on that. That's the whole point of emergency fund. It's not there for future investment. It is not there to earn, great returns on. It is there to be a source of liquidity and security when it's most crucially needed. And you need to get your hands on it right away and not have to worry about any fees and penalties for early withdrawal. You need to have access to it. And you certainly can't have that money invested in the stock market and be exposed to any risk. So I think when people talk about emergency funds, they have different definitions. I would aim for 6 months. I would make absolutely sure it's liquid and very easy to get to and risk-free.
Great point. Next question actually kind of ties into that risk management section that we talked about. So what are the reasons that someone would look at purchasing life insurance? There's a lot of different kinds out there that we probably won't have time to get into today, but just again, as a basis for that financial plan, maybe you set up the estate plan with the will and trust and young kids and things like that. What are some of the reasons that someone would look at purchasing life insurance, and kind of how long is that needed depending on your stage of life?
Yeah, this is another area where I think there has been a lot of confusion. Unfortunately, a fair amount of misuse of life insurance as a tool, and in even some extreme cases, some abuse of life insurance as a tool. So let me just start off by saying life insurance is absolutely a vital tool for many, many, many people. So if to the extent that you are someone who has others dependent upon them, and quite frankly, it's the earning ability that you have. If other people need that from you, and the absence of that earning potential would be a hardship to whether it's spouse, children, parents that you're taking care of, whoever it may be, then there is a role for life insurance, absolutely. The problem is that we've seen a lot of things in the industry where life insurance is set up not just as a pure protection tool, which it's uniquely qualified to do. Other things get lumped in with it, where there's a savings element and an investing element. And I'm not going to go into all the details of those different types of products. In the right hands and with the right understanding of the fees and the intricacies of it, those tools can be used for things above and beyond simple protection. But unfortunately, I think they are quite often misused and missold by a lot of folks in the financial industry. And that's led to all kinds of problems. So life insurance purely as a protection thing is incredibly important. We regularly work with clients to determine, do they need insurance? If so, how much? And then we steer them towards a fulfillment company that can handle those things for them. We don't sell insurance, and we want to make sure that our advice is purely our advice, meaning it is given in the client's best interest and based on our understanding of their situation. And we'll run through all the calculations as part of our financial planning process and get someone on the right path. That also sometimes means telling them, hey, this policy you have, maybe it was appropriate 20 years ago, but it doesn't seem to have much use for you now. Why do you still have this? Why are you still paying on it? And we'll certainly offer that advice as well. So again, not intending to paint anyone in a bad light. It's just that unfortunately, our experiences have been pretty vast that seeing life insurance misused in a number of situations. And that's something that I hope the profession of financial advice cleans up its act. And that's something that's a real hot button for us. We want to make sure that people are receiving the right advice and know what they're getting and what they're paying for what they're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Insurance, any insurance products, insurance and annuities both can have a role in the appropriate plan, but unfortunately, as you mentioned, they're often missold, and there's a lot of fees and things behind the scenes that folks are not really aware of. It's unfortunate. Next question sort of falls into that risk management category. Someone submitted a question, as far as debt relief or debt assistance. Is that something that Oxford deals with, and if not, kind of where what direction can we point somebody in, whether it's student loan debt, things like that, about trying to get that consolidated and paid off in a timely manner as part of a financial plan.
Are you taking this one, Pat?
I can take that one. So overall, again, whether it's credit card debt, student loan debt, things like that, we don't offer any debt consolidation type service here at Oxford, but there are several services out there that can assist you with that. We'd be happy, if somebody has that need, we can certainly help them evaluate. Again, similar to some of the insurance and annuity thing we just talked about, there are a lot of hidden fees from some of those folks you hear on the radio about debt consolidation and things like that. So you do always have to be careful with making sure their interests are aligned with yours and getting that debt paid off. Obviously, everybody needs to get paid if they're providing a service, but I've just heard too many stories of ridiculous interest rates and the appearance of helping to get out of that particular situation, and unfortunately, it costing a lot more in fees to get that done. So again, that's something we can evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Not something we do in-house at Oxford, but certainly we're familiar with. And the idea there obviously is to get it paid off as quickly as possible, or at least get it into a manageable payment that we can work into your financial plan, and then use that alongside the other goals that we establish for you to make sure you're comfortable in your cash flow, and also hopefully have enough left over to save for the future goals that you aspire to achieve.
And I don't know if this is, I'll chime in with something, maybe a different perspective on this. I don't know if it specifically addresses the question that came up, but debt is another thing it's just a tool. And like many tools, if you use them properly and know what you're getting yourself into, they can be really powerful tools. I've been doing some, and I'm not a handy person at all, I've been doing some things around the house lately, and so far I've managed, I'm looking at my thumbs, make sure I haven't smashed anything. I think I've been, okay this go around, but I'm not very good with some of these tools. There are some tools I am good with. And, I think the biggest issue or the most common issue we're seeing where debt has become a problem is when things don't go as planned. So a lot of times that's a medical situation. It can be medical bills that you weren't anticipating and can really create an unbelievable burden. The other one that we hear quite a bit is the student loan debt. And so, the medical one, there's not much you can do in advance to prepare for that. It's a very, difficult situation. There are things you can do to work out bills with medical professionals, particularly if you can show hardship. And a lot of times, hospitals and doctors actually have some forgiveness programs. So with medical debt, I think there's a different feeling about how society, might handle those things. The school, college debt, whatever it may be, that one's tricky. There's no doubt that colleges are incredibly expensive. And if you are able to look at college as an investment into your future, I look at it this way, be proactive about this. It's just, what kind of return am I going to get on the investment I'm making? If I don't have the money to pay for college and I can't get grants and whatever else it may be, or work study, and I choose to borrow, then I better expect that the salary I will get in the outgoing years will be great enough to pay back that debt and leave me enough, left behind to live on. There's a guy that I find really fascinating, a guy named Mike Rowe. He used to host a TV show called Dirty Jobs. And since that show has concluded, he actually has gone on and started a foundation looking at how do we get people to get the right jobs training and skills with maybe perhaps not going to a 4-year college. That may not be the best thing for everybody. I think as a society, we've somehow gotten to this point where, you had to have a high school education to get a job, and now it's become this belief that you have to have a 4-year college degree to get a job, and that's just, not factual at all. There are some amazing jobs out there that don't require a 4-year degree, but may require a year or two of technical training. And, Mike Rowe's point is, hey, let's not overlook these jobs. These are really quality things where people are making direct contributions to society. And yet we're not always encouraging people to take things that maybe don't require as much of an investment in order to get to the type of trade or career that the people are willing to pay for. Whether it's plumbing, welding, I could go on. So I think to the extent you have the ability to look at debt as a tool, and you can look at it and say, well, if I take this on, what will my return on investment be? And I think you really have to encourage that. I've talked with both my kids. I've got one who's a freshman in college. I've got one that's going to head into college year after next. And I talk with them about these things. Like, if we are going to go forward on this, what do you think you're going to be able to get as a return on this investment? Investment of your time and investment of your money. Whether they're earning scholarships, and it doesn't matter. It's still money that has to be spent. And are they going to get the right return on that? So it's a pretty big concept. Debt is just a tool. Make sure you use it wisely to the extent you have that control.
Yep. All right. I think that kind of wraps up the sort of the risk management section of that we were talking about there. So we're going to shift over into a really big one that we have a lot of questions on. It's kind of the big one that people like to talk about, other than the investments. And that's just overall goal planning. So you've got retirement, you've got saving for kids' education, which we just touched on a little bit there, or maybe second home, things like that. It's really, as a topic of goal planning, there's a couple of specific questions on here that I'll probably handle on different vehicles for investing and things like that. But you talk a little bit about kind of just the order, call it the order of operations, for lack of a better word, on saving for things. Should I pay down my loans before saving? On the front end, should I pay down my loans before saving for retirement, or how do you prioritize that? Then also later on in life, as you get a little bit older and have kids that are approaching college, should you pay for college or help fund them college, or pay for your retirement? So there's always a choice to be made. But what kind of some thoughts on kind of the priority of what our recommendation is on how to fund those different items?
Well, the nice thing then, or the one sure sign that you've had to deal with some of these issues, is the color of your hair over here and the thinning of your hair up here. So both those things are happening right now. Yeah. So there are always going to be, as time goes by, there will more than likely be more and more demands on your time and on your money. And that's a lot of pressure, in how people make choices to deal with those things and how they prioritize those different goals is tough. And one of the roles that we play, we actually had a client say this to us one time. I thought it was pretty good. And he said, I feel like you guys are kind of like my financial shrink. So, everyone is grappling with all of these trade-offs, whether that be, do I use some money for fun now? Do I put some money aside for the future? And if I am putting aside for the future, which future am I putting aside for? Is it for retirement? Is it for raising my kids? There's just so many potential demands. And it's sometimes helpful to have a partner just to help you sort through all those issues, and then come up with some priorities. And there's some things we can do in talking with people and just running through a series of questions to understand what might be the higher priorities. And then once you kind of know what that order is, then you can back into saying, all right, what resources do we have available to us that we could put towards those priorities? And sometimes people don't really know until they see it all in action. We had a call with someone just here the other day where just being able to show them on a screen, hey, retiring at age 60, given the lifestyle you said you're looking for, is going to look like this. We think you can make it. And the person said, well, what if I wanted to retire at like 57? And we were able to very quickly say, hey, that's doable, but here's what's going to happen. Something else has to give. We either need you to save a little bit more to get to that goal. We need to spend a little bit less in retirement. And there's the different levers that can be pulled. But sometimes just being able to see that in an interactive way really opens up a lot of possibilities about discussion, and then even circling back to sometimes a client will revisit some priorities once they really see the impact of those different actions they can take.
Definitely. Along the lines of saving for retirement and save for college, so somebody asked, I've heard of different vehicles out there for saving for my children's education. What are your guys' recommendations on what to use? So I can take that one. There are several vehicles out there, and over history there have been some other vehicles as well. Really, the 529 plan is the most popular way to save for a children's education. Again, as Eric said, part of our role is to help you figure out how the different alternatives for saving your money, and you decide what's the best for you in your individual situation. The 529s are sponsored by each state that you live in, so they're not necessarily tied to, oh, I want to go to school in Kentucky, so I need the 529 from Kentucky. It's actually tied to your home state, depending on where you live and if your home state has state income tax. So Ohio does, for example, Kentucky does, Florida does not, for example. Savings that you make into 529 plans, you do get a small tax break on that, so that's something to consider. And really the last, Eric can back this up, the last maybe 10 years or so, a lot of the states have cleaned up their 529 plans. Going back 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot of, pretty limited menu of investment options, only run by a certain amount of fund companies. So it was kind of slim pickings as far as making sure you had a good, diversified portfolio to invest for your child. So a lot of that's gotten better as the Vanguards and T. Rowe Prices of the world have come into the mix. So 529 is a good vehicle. Typically, obviously run by the state or through your state's plan. Typically good investment options, typically pretty low cost, and you might get a little bit of a tax break depending on where you live. The only negative, if you want to call it that, is those dollars are earmarked for education. So you name a beneficiary, child number one. If they don't use it, you can pass it on to a second child or even to yourself. We've actually had clients come to us and say, hey, I'm kind of out of kids to go to school. What do I do with this money? And you can go to cooking classes at the community college and things like that. So the definitions have gotten a little more flexible on that. But by putting it in the 529 to get that tax break, you do have some little bit of limitations on what you can spend the money on. The other alternative is just put it into what I'll call a regular taxable brokerage account. So again, that's just going to be taxed along the way, and you're not going to get any special tax treatment. But it also doesn't have to be 100% used for education. So you lose a little bit on the tax piece, but gain a little bit on the flexibility. The most important thing is working with someone to help you define what that goal is. How much are there scholarships? Are there other funding sources from grandparents or whatever? And that's really what the benefit of working with a planner. As Eric touched on, some software we have about playing with the different assumptions. You want to establish, what is that goal? How far away is it? What's it going to cost? And then, use your resources to fund that. And then from there, once you establish how much you should be saving, then we can have a conversation on, what type of vehicle you should use.
Just following on Pat's point, so 19 years ago, when I had my first child, it's been that long, we wanted to start putting money aside for college. And interestingly, we did not use a 529, even in our home state. Yeah, there were some tax breaks involved with doing it, but at the time, it just seemed like a pretty restrictive plan. I think back then you had to attend a college in your home state. So these things do change over time. Unfortunately, as Pat mentioned, this idea of the 529 plan, this particular tool has gotten better really all throughout its existence, and now every state has one. It's not the only game in town, but it's something that has become the predominant tool simply because Congress and the states have expanded the tax breaks and expanded the definitions of how this money can be used in such a favorable way. It's pretty tough to argue with them any longer. So, like as Pat said, the only thing you might do is utilize a 529 for part of the college funding, and then you can establish just a separate taxable investment account on the side, and use those things to balance each other out a little bit. You get a little more flexibility on investments with the private investment account. No restrictions there. You do pay tax along the way, but there's always ways to invest dollars in a tax smart way so that you minimize the tax drag along the way. So it's not truly tax-free like the 529 would be if it's used for education, but there are a lot of things you can do to make the cost of that stay pretty low from a tax standpoint. Things do change in the world. You got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, we actually talked about this on one of our previous webinars. We'll see how the cost of education as a whole changes as a result of this COVID thing. You see colleges going out of business or restructuring, and I think more people might start to pursue more trade jobs like Eric mentioned, or at least associate degrees, things like that. I think the menu of available options for higher education as a whole I think that landscape is going to change pretty drastically as a result of some good, some bad, some of the things that have gone on here recently. So all the more reason to do your saving that you need to do to reach your goals, but perhaps use these different vehicles just to make sure you've got a diversified bucket of funds that you'll be able to attack your goals with. Next question's kind of a general question, but also does relate to retirement a little bit. Question we get a lot. I hear this thing about a Roth IRA. What's a Roth IRA? It's almost taken on a mythical thing in the news. So the question itself is pretty simple. What's the difference between the traditional IRA and Roth IRA, and which one should I be using? So Eric, either of us can take that one, but I know you've got some passion on the subject, so I'll defer.
It's the CPA nerd in me trying to get out. The Roth has taken on, as Pat said, this like mythical status as being the only way you should invest. And I'm not entirely sure what's driving that. I think it's just this recognition that people just don't like taxes, which is great. And so, you have different vehicles you can use to earmark dollars for retirement. The IRA was, called individual retirement arrangement or individual retirement account, something that Congress created decades ago. And what it basically says was that dollars that are inside this vehicle will not incur tax along the way. But when you go to withdraw funds from that vehicle, you will pay tax as you take the dollars out. And that's still where the just extreme vast majority of retirement dollars are held, is still in these IRAs. The Roth IRA was created, there was a senator named Roth, and they said, how about we create an IRA that does not have any taxes along the way, so same idea, but doesn't even have any taxes when you go withdraw the money and spend it at a later date. And so I think right away people think, well, that sounds even better. But the way you get the dollars in there is quite a bit different. You have to take after-tax dollars. So let's say you've got, you work at your job, you've got some extra disposable income left over at the end of the month. You've paid income tax on that. That money's already been taxed. And then you take whatever's left over and you stick that into this Roth vehicle to the extent you're eligible. There are some caps on who's eligible. And then you'll have those dollars be forever tax-free, which is great. But if you look at the IRA, which most people end up funding, some people make contributions along the way, but generally speaking, people put money into their 401k, which is their employer's plan at work. Those dollars never have been taxed. They come out of your paycheck, they go right into the account, and they are invested without tax all along those years for that growth. Keep in mind, you never have paid tax on these dollars. And then when you go to take them out later on, you will pay taxes. So the interesting thing is, and I understand how this gets so conflated, you have the same mathematical result. Assuming the tax rates stay the same level throughout the entry period, the exit period, you have the exact same mathematical result in terms of what the traditional IRA can do and what the Roth IRA can do. And yet somehow people think of Roth and say, it's tax-free, it's tax-free. Well, yeah, but you had to pay taxes up front to put the dollars into it. So it all nets out the same, strangely enough, but that gets lost in the wash quite a bit. So I think all retirement saving is a smart idea. Understand what your needs are going to be, work on the math, discount that back to today's values, and that's stuff we help clients with all the time. The vehicle itself is not really the key. It's putting the dollars away, investing them prudently, and then being patient and leaving the stuff alone. Rebalance along the way as you go. So I'm kind of a little far afield from that, but Roths are great, but they're just one way of getting the job done. They're not the only way.
Yep. It's probably literally the number one question I get, especially from younger people. They just, like you said, it's in the news and you hear about it and it sounds like the greatest thing. And again, saving is good, and you should be putting away as much as you possibly can towards retirement. I mean, 15, 20%, even more if you can help it, into this long-term saving. There's different vehicles to get that done, but not one that's the be-all, end-all. Next section of our financial well check is kind of just cash flow management, gets into taxes a little bit. We actually got a couple questions that kind of fit under that umbrella. Another question we commonly get, especially from retirees, is should I pay off my mortgage? So I can handle that one, and I'll let Eric chime in a bit afterwards. Really, that comes down to personal choice. So our job, again, as advisors, is to say, you can go down this path, and that means this. Go down this path, and that means this. And then you can decide what's best for you and your family. And that applies to a number of different situations that we deal with. Specifically on the mortgage, really comes down to, we run into two scenarios pretty often. One is I've got this pile of cash already in the bank and it's built up over time, or I've done some saving. Should I use that to pay off the mortgage? that's, again, really a personal choice. You're not foregoing anything other than potentially investing those dollars for the future. But you're not incurring any tax. You're not running into any scenarios like that. So, it's up to you. Do you want to get rid of the debt or not? Again, depending on your interest rate and things like that, interest rates traditionally, it's been, I know somebody's on the call that's in the mortgage business, so he knows all about rates, but interest rates have traditionally been low, so that's a good use of debt. As Eric said earlier, debt is just a tool. If you can use it effectively and at a low rate, it might be prudent to keep that and not pay it off, despite the fact that you might have the burden of the debt over you. So in a scenario where you have cash on hand, again, you're not really out anything. It's just an idea of, do I want to use it here or use it here? Another scenario that we run into quite a bit is, should I take money out of my portfolio to pay off the mortgage? Again, with the idea of just kind of getting it off my back. Again, we really can't put a price on the peace of mind that it would give you to be out from underneath that debt. Sometimes you've been paying on that thing for 15, 20, 25 years, and I'm retired and I just want to get rid of it. And that's a perfectly fine way to look at it. The alternative to that is, what are you taking it out of? So there's a market aspect of that. Again, we don't make business of predicting returns, but over time, a well-diversified portfolio should do about, call it 7% per year, over the long term. I'm not talking, 3 months. I'm talking over a 10-year period. So you're taking something out of something that should earn 7 over the long term, and you're putting it into a house, which, depending on where you live, and this can vary, typically doesn't go up quite by that much. So look, just historically, home prices have risen by either inflation or CPI, population index, things like that. So you're maybe looking at 2 or 3%. So again, on the surface, taking something taking dollars from something that should earn 7, and putting it into something that earning 2 or 3, mathematically that doesn't seem like a great decision. But again, for you, it might be perfectly fine. The real kicker is, are you going to pay tax on those dollars to get that out? And that's really the one. Again, still obviously always up to the client, and we advise both scenarios. But we've seen a lot of instances where the client might only have an IRA, where you, as Eric talked about with that traditional and Roth concept, if you take dollars out of the IRA, you're going to pay tax on them. So if you've got somebody with $1 million to make it up, and they've got a $300,000 mortgage left over that they're really dead set on getting rid of, it might cost them $400,000 or $450,000 if you include the taxes to get that covered. So again, that would be a burden off their shoulders to have that debt gone, but they've also effectively cut their portfolio in half as far as what they need to live on for the remainder of their lifetime. So it does vary by situation. We've seen clients go both ways. So they say, what, I don't really care about the math part, I need to get this rid of. Or they say, what, I don't really want to have this debt, but the rate's so good, and I see your point on leaving it grow in the market. So we've seen that go both ways.
Yeah, and just reiterate a couple things Pat said. One is this idea that it's back to debt as a tool. Most people can't just go out and write a check for a brand new house or a used house, whatever it may be. But a house is a pretty big purchase, and not everyone has just that much cash laying around. That's just why mortgages exist. It gives you a chance to spread the cost of that out over 30 years. It's the most common way to do it. And I think the piece of advice there would be, make sure you are taking on debt that is reasonable in relation to your income and your needs. Once again, I think a lot of times we find situations where maybe the guy at the bank wants to really get you into that loan because they're getting paid to make loans, and it's fine. But are people being pushed into taking on debt that like, oh, you can probably handle these payments, and maybe it's just too much house. Maybe it's twice as much house as they need. So a really good piece of advice, if you want to have an excellent experience in saving for retirement, is don't take on too much of a house. So that's just one caveat there. But if you take a look, and this is going back to Pat's point about what if I borrow money, and what happens in terms of the cost of the debt versus what it buys. It's interesting how things have changed over time. Right now, I would view it this way: if I have extra dollar around, I can choose to invest that dollar into an asset that's going to appreciate it, 2 or 3%. That's housing. And again, LA, New York, Miami, you're going to see different experiences with that. But across most of the country, a house investment is probably an investment that, an asset probably grows at 2 or 3% a year. And that's before you factor in the costs of upkeep and maintenance. And I've seen different studies that basically said that house as an investment is break even maybe after you factor in everything, the property taxes and maintenance. But so just say it's a 2 or 3% asset. Or you put in a diversified portfolio, and historically speaking, you should do 7% over the long haul. So on a 30-year look, 30-year investment into a house, 30-year investment into a diversified portfolio, I'm feeling pretty good about making 7 on the portfolio versus making 2 or 3 on the house. And so when I look at it that way, I would say I'd rather be investing dollars into the market rather than into the house. When you make your mortgage payment, you are making small little deposits towards the equity in the home. So from that standpoint, it is an investment. Historically, though, those returns on housing, those returns on the stock market have been really consistent. But if you go back to the 1980s and look at what mortgages were going for back then, you could talk about 30-year mortgages that were 8, 9, 10%. So imagine if you would come from that scenario saying, I got to borrow money at 10% to invest into a house that's going to grow at 2 or 3%, or even invest in the stock market and only get 7%. In that scenario, and you would think, gosh, I wouldn't want to take on any debt at all. I mean, I'm going to borrow like crazy just to buy this thing that's not even growing that much. And so I can see that the aversion to debt back in the 1980s would have been pretty smart. Today, we have this topsy-turvy world where interest rates continue to stay at unbelievably low historic levels, like stuff that I never thought I would see in my investing career. It does make taking on debt a little more attractive would have been, say, in the 1980s. Still don't want to buy too much house, but it does make that tool a lot more powerful because it allows you to borrow, use the bank's money and potentially make even more. So I know it sounds like we're talking out both sides of our mouth on this. As Pat said, at the end of the day, your comfort level, your peace of mind, how it feels inside to you to have that debt is a really important driving factor. And we often run the numbers for folks both ways and just show them, if you do pay it off, it looks like this, or if you continue on, here's what you could do. And we just kind of coach them through that.
Next question kind of related to cash flow and taxes, and this was actually related to charitable intent, something we deal with quite a bit with clients. So what are the different ways to give money to charity, and is there one that's better than the other given the current tax environment, or what are some different ways that I could get that done, and what might be the most tax efficient for me?
Oh, well, Pat, why don't you start this one off?
I can do that. So really there's 3 main ways that we deal with clients in working with charitable donations. So first is just giving plain old cash. So whether that's in the collection plate at church or your favorite charity, art museum, whatever it might be, you can obviously donate cash. Either literally give cash, write the check, just right out of your pocket. So the advantage of that is obviously pretty liquid, pretty easy to do, and you could still potentially get a deduction. So without going into too much of a rant on taxes, in a good way, the standard deduction, which is essentially how much everyone can deduct off their taxes, went up pretty substantially. Back in 2017, it actually doubled as part of the tax cuts that the administration put through. So typically when you make a charitable donation of any kind, no matter if it's cash, stock, or other things that we'll talk about here in a bit, you would get a deduction on that if you, what's called itemized your deductions. You might have medical expenses, property taxes, things like that. And a fair amount of folks, still do even today, but really before these tax laws went through, a lot of folks itemized. So you're able to, make that donation to the church and, get that deduction. Now with the standard deduction doubling, there was a bunch of folks that had to go through quite frankly, the hassle, and Eric's a CPA, so he knows a little bit about it, of making that deduction or itemizing those deductions and tracking every single thing. Now, since it doubled, a whole bunch of people will just do the standard deduction. So why it still feels good to donate to charity, no matter what vehicle you use, you may or may not get that deduction. So one way is just to do cash. A second great way to do it is through the use of appreciated stock. So appreciated stock being, whether you inherited stock and it's just grown over a long time, you've never touched it. There's different ways you can get stocks out of your retirement plans at work that might have, it's called a very low cost basis. So if you were to sell that stock, let's say you got it for $10 a share and now it's $100 a share. In order to spend that and use that as cash, you'd have to sell it and incur that very large gain and pay what are called capital gains taxes on that. Again, not the end of the world, you've made money, but you took that, then used that cash to give to the church. You'd be out some taxes on that. A way to get around that actually is just to give those shares directly to the organization. So most places these days that we deal with have some sort of account set up with a local advisor where you can actually gift those shares to the church. The best part about that is nobody ends up paying any tax, or nobody loses except for the IRS. So you get the deduction for giving that share, The church can actually sell it and not pay any gains. And again, the only one that's really out of luck is Uncle Sam, which is something that most people enjoy. So giving stock is a second way to do it. The third most common way that we deal with, if you are over the required minimum distribution age, which used to be age 70 and a half, now it's actually age 72, with some laws that have changed here recently. You're required to take dollars from an IRA. So if you save money in a 401k, like Eric mentioned earlier, and you start, you're forced to take withdrawals once you reach a certain age, you can actually take a portion of that and give that, directly to your favorite charitable organization. Benefit there is, let's say you were required to take $100,000 out of your IRA this year. Normally, you would have had to pay, $100,000 or tax on that $100,000. If you give 20 of it away to a qualified, charitable organization, let's say you give 20,000, you actually would only pay tax on 80. So that's a way to give cash. Again, still benefits the charity and actually lowers your tax liability a little bit. So just giving cash, regular out of your checking account, giving appreciated stock, and then using this technique called qualified charitable distribution. If you qualify, are the main three ways we see folks get charitable intent taken care of in today's tax environment.
And some of the folks listening may have actually heard about some of these other vehicles out there that tie into these same tax concepts, but they've created a pretty interesting way of making these donations and getting a little more control over the timing and some of the beneficiaries of it. So you'll hear these different kind of community charitable funds, these pooled investment vehicles, where you can still make a donation. Let's say you've had you've been very blessed with a nice tax event through your employer or something. You've got some extra compensation that you don't need yet, and you know that you have some charitable intent, but you just don't really know where you want those to go just yet, and you certainly don't have enough to start your own foundation. There are ways to pool your investments together with a lot of other people who are in a similar boat, and you can contribute dollars into the fund, invest those dollars, have them grow. And then over time, you can say, hey, I'd like to, I've got some money I want to give to this particular organization 5 years from now. Just a kind of a clever way of pulling your investments with others, getting some diversification, and getting that ability to direct these dollars at a time of your choosing into the future and still get all the tax benefits along the way too. So just leverage some of the things Pat's talking about, but you might hear more of these being discussed out in the media now.
Yep. All right, so the last couple of questions are actually pertaining to investments, right? What's the process of going through to pick investments and what type of things should I be invested in? So the first one is, I'm just starting out in my 401k. I'm relatively new. I'm younger. I've got a long time horizon for retirement. How should I go about picking the investments for my 401k or 403b, or what kind of things should I be looking for? Or is there a different model I should choose? What type of things go into that security selection?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Depends on a lot of things. Generally speaking, you have, if you're looking at putting dollars away for retirement, you got a long time horizon. Your options are, broadly speaking, stocks, bonds, and cash. Cash, I think everyone kind of knows what that is. No risk, but also no return. Second category, bonds. Bond is just simply you taking your money and lending it to somebody. You can lend it to the government. Those are called government bonds. You can lend it to corporations. There might be AAA rated companies or junk bonds, which are companies that are low rated. But essentially, you are lending money in exchange for an interest payment on that. And there are no guarantees, but that's you kind of get what you get on the coupon rate. And pretty simple concept. Stocks are nothing more than you taking your money and instead of lending it and expecting to get a payment back, you're investing it into the company's future, and you're hopeful that the company will take those dollars and put them to work, whether it might be building a new factory, introducing new products, whatever it may be, and that over time you will get a return on that investment. That return will take the form of either dividends, which are just periodic payments made back to you. They tend to be discretionary. In other words, they're not guaranteed. And then the other way you can make money on stocks is that eventually you can see appreciation in that share of stock that you purchased if the company's been well managed and grows over time. And someone will pay you more in the future than you paid for at the time you bought it. So stocks, bond, and cash are generally the three categories. A younger person starting out, I would look at the historical returns of those three vehicles, and I would ask myself, which one do I like best? And it's as simple as this: 12, 10, 6, or 3. Small company stocks, historically speaking, have returned 12%. Large company stocks have returned 10. Bonds have returned 6, and cash is returned, I'll call it 3, and that's being generous. That's before taxes and inflation. I'll just forget about taxes, take that out. That's before inflation. Inflation has historically run at 3%. So just do the math again. Small company stocks earn 12, you lose 3% inflation, but your real growth is 9. Large company stocks, 10%, minus 3 equals 7% real growth over time. Now you get down to bonds, you're saying 6% minus 3, you're only getting 3% growth over time. And then cash, maybe the bank's paying something, which unfortunately the banks aren't paying much today, but historically they paid something, but inflation ate all that up and you basically end up losing money on cash. And just look at those numbers and say, which one do you like best? If I've got a long time to wait and I don't need the dollars, I'm going to go with the one that's going to give me a stronger return. That's going to be some combination of stocks. I wouldn't say you should be 100% in stocks at all times, but if I'm 25 years old, just started a company and I've put some money in the 401k, I want to be looking at with a long-term perspective. And I just want to look at the historical numbers and say, what should I do? And go, yeah, I think I'll take the one that pays better. It's pretty simple. So I would have a portfolio very heavily built around stocks. And then as far as the individual vehicles, every 401k these days is by law must have a pre-approved menu that's been screened and is well presented. Once you've made the decision that I'd like to have a preponderance of stocks, there are a lot of ways to get that done. You can either pick your own options inside the plan, or every plan comes with some default options where it's as simple as saying, give me your age today or how many years will it be before you retire, and they'll back into it and rebalance it for you. But there should be a heavy dose of stocks in there. You still need to look underneath the hood though and look specifically at how they're managing those things over time to make sure that they don't get too conservative on you as time goes by. But every plan's a little bit different, but I would just make sure you have a heavy dose of stocks in there.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'll add on to that and kind of touch on it. We're personally here at Oxford, big fans of having stocks for the long run in portfolios, even for retirees. So one good option that Eric mentioned are called target date funds or lifestyle funds. You say, hey, I'm going to retire in 2060. That's a long time from now. So that model will actually give you automatically quite a bit of stocks and then work to get a little more conservative as you get closer to that date. The one thing Eric touched on it a bit that I would caution you against is those pre-picked ones. While they're very easy to manage, you don't have to think about it. They're typically pretty low cost. They might start to get a little too conservative before you want to get conservative. So you got the 2060 fund and it's all of a sudden 2040. If you look under the hood, that thing might only have 30 or 35% stocks, and you still have 20 years to run where you need that growth. So we are fans of those automatic kind of set it and forget it target date funds, but if you're in kind of that 40 to 55 range, you do want to make sure that you're not getting too conservative, as you get towards retirement. Again, we've helped clients with that, and we've advised several plans on that exact thing. So if you're in a 401k plan, you should have hopefully an advisor coming out to meet with you, quarterly or so to review your goals and review the investment options. But that is something to keep an eye on, that you don't get too overly conservative and away from stocks as you get closer to retirement. All right, it's actually the last question of the day, and that's another kind of popular one in the news, and then one we've got every now and then somebody will ask. So the question is, should I be investing in cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is a pretty popular one. The cannabis and then the weed stocks is another one that we occasionally get from younger folks wanting to try to be on the front edge of something. So, the question is, should I be investing in cryptocurrencies? And if yes, how do I do that, or where do I begin?
Yeah, that's we do get that question on occasion, and I think it's really important to take a big step back here and really define what an investment is versus what a speculation is. So an investment, I'll use a company like Procter & Gamble. Well-known company, employs tens of thousands of people around the planet. They make plenty of products that everyone uses and has heard of. They've got a 150-year history of being in business, employing people, making good products, paying taxes, and importantly, they've been paying dividends after their shareholders for an unbelievably long time, and even increases dividends over time. So, not to say that it's a sure bet, but this is the essence of an investment. I am going to invest dollars into something that is a productive member of society, employs people, pays taxes, makes things, and I expect that if history is any guide, that I should probably expect to receive some dividends from this company as they have had profits that they distribute back to us. and I will probably be able to sell that stock in the future for more than I paid for it today. That's an investment. Speculation is really no more than running into the casino and saying, put it all on 24 black, let it go. It's pure chance. There's no underlying investment there. There's no company, there's no product, there's no employees, there's no taxes, there's nothing there. It's just it's just a random bet. The cryptocurrency thing is more or less the casino. You are hoping that you can buy Bitcoin or whichever cryptocurrency you're into. You're hoping that you can buy this thing, and let's face it, a lot of the people who are buying it not because they're actually using the tool for anything. Actually, I do think it's interesting as a tool, but as an investment, I think it's a terrible idea. They're hoping they can just flip it to somebody else fast enough before the market goes down, for these things. And so it is the essence of a speculation. It has no investment characteristics whatsoever. And if I'm going to invest for my future, I'm going to invest in something. I'm not going to speculate on my future. And I think, unfortunately, the cryptocurrencies have gotten wrapped up in this thing of, hey, I paid $5,000 for these, but I just sold it for $8,000 like in 2 weeks. Are those stories true? Yeah, they're true. But there are just as many true stories of, hey, I'm the guy who bought it at $8,000. Oh my gosh, now it's worth $2,000. I don't know what happened. It's because it's not tied to any type of predictable reality. It's a speculation, not an investment. So in case you couldn't tell, we're not very big fans of things that are speculations. Investments we can talk about all day, and we can look at that rationally, and we can take a very data-driven approach to it, and we can build for someone's financial future based on the math and the data. We can't do that with cryptocurrencies. There's nothing there. Maybe Pat wants to soften it. I don't know, but that's pretty anti those things.
That goes against everything I was going to say. No, kidding. No, I'm in total agreement on that. And again, it's we're big fans of planning first, starting with a goal in mind, building back to what needs to go into that plan, and you need to be investing in tangible things, predictable with long-term historical returns to make sure that you can get to those goals. So it might be fun to take a look at what Bitcoin's doing. You hear all the stories in the news about the wild swings, but when you're basing things in a plan and historical performance of investments, it's important to, as Eric said, invest in real things that hire people and pay dividends and proven with a long track record over time. So we got about 5 minutes left. Actually, that was the last question we had today. So I think that wraps up today's session. Again, just as a housekeeping, we'll record this, put it out on the website next week, send some follow-ups to those on the call. If you have any questions or want to get started on the plan, or know somebody that would like to get started on a plan, we'd be happy to meet with them. So please just reach out, and we'll go about and get that scheduled. So thanks for your time today, everybody. And
I will put in one extra plug. I mean, if you head out to the Oxford website, so it's www.oxfordfp.com. Actually, the whole site's been rebuilt here recently, and hopefully has some really good informative articles on it. There's also an opportunity on there to even put some information in and get some immediate feedback on how you are progressing right now for your own retirement plan. Doesn't take very long. It's kind of fun. Don't worry, no one's going to call and harass you. It's a chance for you just to get some immediate feedback. And then if you would like to speak any more about that, you can choose to say, please contact me, and we can talk a little bit more. Some good tools out there. Excellent newsletter that we send out on a monthly basis, blog posts. You can sign up for those things. I would encourage you to check it out, and hopefully you'll find something there that will be of value to you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, that wraps up today. And I think that's it. Everybody have a good day and a good rest of the week. Good weekend.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.